video diaries of the strange encounters of everyday Australians. There are a lot of people out there who've had experiences. We come across them all the time now, even more than before. So let's talk about near-death experiences. And I know that some of you, or most of you, probably all of you, have read about these experiences, and some of you will know a lot more than others. And I'm very excited to talk about this part, which is the rest of the story. And I recently read a book by PMH Atwater called Near-Death Experiences, what they teach us about living and dying in our true purpose. And it just expanded the whole subject of these types of experiences, again, in my own thinking, but we'll go on to that. So, just to touch base, I'll briefly go through just a little bit about them, and then we'll go into other information. So, near-death experiences occur close to death or a physical emotional crisis. A quarter of the people who have reported their experiences are not close to death, and that's really important to remember, that these near-death experiences are part of a larger group of experiences, of transformative experiences, and there's many different ways we can transform. Now, and what happens with those other experiences is that they can create I guess you call a formula for change, the same or very similar to near-death experiences. For instance, Raymond Moody talks about the shared death experience, where I think he says in his book that he was sitting with one of his parents dying, and while he and I think his other members of the family were sitting there with them, they were all drawn into a group shared death experience, even though Raymond Moody and the others were not dying. And this is very interesting. That's where it gets really interesting for me. So 75% have a sense of being close to death or a life-threatening situation, or believe they were clinically dead. And when I think the key element here is that apart from those who are clinically dead, having a sense of being close to death or a life-threatening situation, for me it's become about the intensity of emotion that seems to act as a trigger for, you could call it paranormal type experiences. But again, we'll get on to that. And near-death experiences are transformative. And not all of this, the depth of the transformation is not the same for everybody, because it depends on the intensity of the experience. So just briefly, some of the features of the near-death experience: a sense of being out of the physical body. But this is not for everybody. Sense of moving through darkness or tunnel, and that swirling vortex is actually what happened to me. In my experience, I saw that. Experience of great light or darkness. Have encounters with deceased loved ones, some previously known, some not. You might have heard of the stories of people having a near-death experience, meeting siblings who had died before they were actually born, and then coming back and telling their parents, I met someone who said he was my brother. Tell me about that, to the parents, and the parents go, shock, shock. We never planned to tell you about that, but yes, that's true. How does that happen? How do they access that knowledge? And then they can experience a border of no return. Well, actually, this is one of those cases where she didn't actually die, but she was under intense emotional stress, and her child had died. It was only very, very young, and she'd been to the funeral and came home that day, lay down on the bed, and the next thing she knows, she was out of her body, walking with a little child along a path, and got to this border where she met a spiritual being who said, "You can't come any further, I'll take care of the child now." She handed the child over, and then the woman came back and then woke up. More to that, but woke up. So there's this border of no return where it seems that people reach and they're not allowed to go because it's not their time. They've got things to come back and do, or people to take, to look after, or whatever. And sometimes they can see cities of light. And this is very interesting to me too. And in those cities are all types of beings, or all types of people, I should say, and in those cities they can actually cluster together in groups and be talking about reviewing their lives, or they can be listening to people who are educating them more about future lives. Encounters with spiritual beings and religious figures, and it's not unusual for people, no matter what religion, but to meet a Jesus-like or a Christ-like being. That's quite common actually, but they can encounter spiritual beings that they can't identify to, they just act as guides to them. And they can have a strong sense of oneness and interconnectedness with all that is, and that's quite common too, where people will come back and they feel like during the experience that nothing is separate. The sense of separation that we have here on planet Earth just doesn't exist. Everything is one. And then they can have access knowledge of the nature of the universe. And I have heard a couple of people who told me that when I had that experience, I knew how the universe worked. But when I came back, I can't remember. It's like it's so big. It won't squish down into my consciousness, I just can't access that anymore. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they felt. And there are distressing near-death experiences too. There are fewer of those, but they do exist. And some of them can be quite frightening. They can have an awareness of a non-existence, or be feeling completely alone wherever they are in this afterlife or afterworld. They can meet demonic beings, they can hear loud annoying noises, see frightening animals. And I'll just pick up on that too, because these negative sort of experiences, for a long time, like my experience that I had, I was quite frightened from it. So I wasn't feeling too keen about talking about it, because I've had this experience where something was really disturbing, it wasn't really good. There's all these other stories about people having, meeting loving beings and all those sorts of things. But I did it. What was that about, But then I started to look into shamanism, and I started practicing shamanic journey, did some training under a mentor and things like that. That's still ongoing. And my first shamanic journey was very frightening, extremely frightening. I didn't know what to expect. I actually went there the first time as a skeptic. I thought, and I liked it. I think, okay, if there's something in this, I'm going to go and find out. And that seems to be my modus operandi. So I did. And when I was in the journey, I met this dog with 3 heads, and it was rabid, and it was chasing me. And I actually came out of it because it terrified me so much. But since that time, that was a couple of years ago, since that time I've had a lot of time to think about negative experiences like that. And for me, I now think that they use a mechanism, or whatever it is, uses a mechanism that will get your particular attention. For me, it was fear. So I started to think, well, maybe it's not negative about me so much, but it was what whatever it was had to knock on my door to get my attention. Other people have different types of experiences. So, So, and they can have see beings in distress and feel negatively judged by a higher power too. And I haven't actually heard of encounters like that myself, but I have read about some of them. So there's a wide range of responses. But for me, it's about what happens after the experience, because that is really amazing. I'm hoping I'm going to tell you something eventually that maybe you haven't thought about before. But people come back with heightened perceptions, and they can see powerful images and emotions from that experience that are much richer and deeper than what they experience here in their normal reality. They come back with a sense of knowledge of the future and messages regarding life's purpose, and have a life review. Again, not everyone has those experiences. Now, just to remind you that the term NDE was coined by Raymond Moody in 1975. And like I said before, these near-death experiences belong to a larger group of experiences. You could call them mystical experiences. And our history and religions are just riddled with these types of experiences. And I think we in the West particularly tend to forget that all of our saints, most of our saints, I think all of them, had some sort of supernatural experience that they based a lot of their writings on. And I think we just forget that, and it's always good to remind ourselves. And their transpersonal experience, they change the course of a person's life, and their consciousness and where they're going and what they're doing, and then they put something positive into practice. Now, various surveys have suggested 40 to 15% of the population have near-death experiences. That's a lot of people. But I want you to remember that percentage when we go on. And in the Netherlands, there was a study done where 18% of people who had cardiac arrest reported near-death experiences, or clinically dead. Dr. Kenmore, he's a very interesting person who stayed with me for a while back in the 90s. And when he was here, he was before he'd written his book Mindsight, which was the study of people who had near-death experiences but had been blind from birth. And I find that fascinating because that is not so much, well, it could be, it's evidence of something. And you've got to ask yourself the question, how do people who've been blind from birth have the context for their experiences and what they see anyway? They haven't learnt the language that relates to what it was that they see. How does that happen? How does that happen? But these experiences aren't hallucinations like the skeptics say or some medical doctors say, because hallucinations are not full of this complex, rich tapestry of details and emotions and stories. They're just not like that. And near-death experiences are not the result of a dying brain that's suffering from a lack of oxygen, because what I understand, and maybe lovely ladies down the back who are nurses might tell us, fill us in a bit more about this, but my understanding is anoxia creates disorientation, and the memory can be a bit poor from that as well. Whereas in near-death experiences, the memory is clear, crystal clear, details are remembered so well and experienced fully. So that's the difference there. Now, 55 to 89% of people report an increase in psychic phenomena and or healing abilities. And that happens with a lot of people who've had all types of experiences, all types. That can be close encounters of an extraterrestrial kind. It can be people who have seen a ghost or apparitions. It can happen to people who've walked in crop circles. The psychic phenomena can start for all sorts of reasons. And the after effects of near-death experiences, the psychological ones, and I guess philosophical as well. We come to love and accept others without attachments and conditions. I like that one because we need more of that. It's not that easy to live like that, but they tend to do that. They have a sense of timelessness where they're in tune with the flow of life. And often synchronicity will emerge out of that too, when they're in that flow. Psychic displays are commonplace. Out-of-body episodes, manifestations of beings met in a near-death state, remembering the future, finishing another sentence, hearing plants and animals speak. They seem to be much more sensitive, become sensitive to everything on all levels. Their diet, what they put into their bodies, what they think, how they feel, everything is heightened. They regard themselves as an immortal soul in a material form. And we've heard those, the phrase, you're a spiritual being having an earthly experience or whatever it is, something like that. It's not the other way around. And the foreign becomes familiar and the familiar becomes foreign. And I believe there is the story of the Kali Yuga, where the times that we live in is where everything becomes reversed, where it's good is bad and bad is good, those sorts of things. And these people tend to take on have a sense of that. And I think that's in preparation for something, but we'll get onto that as well. The after effects of near-death experiences, this comes up in a lot of paranormal type experiences, the sensitivity to light and sound. Very, very common. Very common. I don't know why, but it does happen. The energy surges in the body can be accompanied by lights in the air. It's not unusual for people to talk about seeing small balls of light that are floating around inside the home or outside the car or wherever it is. People can become electrically sensitive. I'm sure there's some people here who probably have had that experience. Nodding heads, no? Okay. But that's very common too. Watches stop and people say, oh, I can't wear a watch, I gave up. Microphones squeal, recording devices quit, TV channels change by themselves, light bulbs pop, all sorts of disruptions in those sorts of things happen. Have an altered approach to health and healing, employment, finances, lifestyle and relationships. Complete upheaval and change in the way that they live, the way that they think about life, the way they do things, their behaviour, everything. And they relearn to use their own body and brain. Now this is the book that I read recently, and it's an excellent book. If you're interested in the subject, this is the book to get, because it's written by PMH Atwater, who's now in her 70s. She got involved in near-death research almost at the beginning. I think Raymond Moody was the one who actually brought it to the public attention, but Dr. Kenmore was also involved, and a couple of years later she got involved. And she's written a great book which encompasses so much more than what you probably read in other books. And she said the core essence of near-death states for people when they return is that there is only one God or intelligence, put it that way, because God's often a trigger word for people, but only one intelligence, one higher energy, one universal energy, if you'd like to say that, which humans tend to split up into, and they call them gods and do their thing. There's only one people. We're all part of the one group, the one human tribe, one family. Have that sense as well of one existence. We all exist together as one. And the one law for all of us is love. And if that doesn't flow in people's lives, then you can have problems. The one commandment is to be of service. And she says that these experiences change people, they come back, they have a sense of mission, and then they want to be of service to humanity. And there's one solution to all our problems is forgiveness. I don't know if you agree with that. And this isn't meant to be a sermon, but I'm just telling you what she's saying and what she has found with all the people. And she's been involved since early 70s, I think. No, late 77 or 78. I think she's interviewed in depth well over 6,000 people who've had these experiences. Now this is where it starts to get a bit more interesting for me, I should say, because Paladin Jenkins, I don't know if any of you know him, I think he's in the UK. He's done a lot of work in crop circles too, but he refers to near-death experiences or experiences like those as soul quakes. So your soul is deeply touched, perhaps ripped open and put back together, but it's a quake within us to wake us up and to catalyse us. And these experiences involve a high stress. But PMH Atwater talks about a colloidal condition. So she says that when people have experiences, their reality is shattered. It falls apart. After a while, they do eventually manage to put it back together, but they have to rebuild it. Not unlike a shamanic initiation experience where people are dragged off by the spirits, torn apart, rebuilt again from new, completely new, and then come back to their tribe and tell about their experiences. But she talks about the piece in the middle as the colloidal condition. And she refers to it as like a bucket of water that you're stirring. And you know, you can get that swirling vortex that will start in the middle of it. It's swirling. But when you want to swirl it back the other way, you stop and you start to swirl it like that. It's the moment between going in that direction and that direction where there is no direction as such. It's just a complete falling away of one and then starting off again going in a different direction. But that point, she refers to it as the colloidal condition. Surprisingly, when people have those type of experiences, particularly near-death experiences, you may think that when they die, when they do go without oxygen, when they are holed up in hospital for a while, a long time for some people, while they're recovering, like Daniel Brinkley had to learn to walk, talk again, that you would think that part of their brains wouldn't be functioning as well as prior to the experience. But guess what? In most of her cases, she found that there's brain enhancement and that people become more intelligent. They take IQ tests, some of them that she's done, and they've become more intelligent. They've developed or accessed the latent abilities within them so that they expand, and suddenly they're more knowledgeable about certain things which they may not have had any education about at all, right? It's not unusual for people who had a death experience and then they'll wake up and they start speaking a language they've never been educated about. Or they'll be musicians, or they will, do things that just they weren't doing before the experience. And they're very, very good at it. They can be fantastic painters, artists. They're very good. So their brain is enhanced somehow. And that's very interesting. They have a brain shift, and she tries to explain it as perhaps because a lot of us are left brain, so people who have experiences, and I find this with people who have close encounters too, they become more right-brained, or they use their right-brain abilities. So they become highly creative and artistic, and the personal expression just starts to flow out of them. But she tries to explain it as perhaps there is a holing of the way we use our brain. So we have a whole brain shift. So we start to use our brain more in balance than what we were doing before. And accompanying that, it touches our soul and changes our own sense of spirituality. And we have an awakening. People have an awakening. And Mary Rodwell, as some of you will know, UFO researcher, talks a lot about an awakening. And she's written a book about it for people who've had those type of experiences. And from there becomes the evolution of human consciousness. Our consciousness expands. And no wonder people, sort of feel like they're not the same people they were before, because their consciousness expanded and they become different people. And they can look back at their life and go, I don't recognise that person. This is who I am now. I'm sure some of you had that experience or shades of it for all sorts of reasons as you're growing and developing. Now she proposes that transformation is a biological imperative. And she starts to talk about this new universal patterning that creates traits in us that get passed on to not just the next generation, but generation and generation and generation after that. Okay? So let's talk about, and she found, before I go on to that, she found that with people who had near-death experiences, and she did a lot of work with children too, okay, so what we call indigo children, who are bright and they're cluey, they're just intelligent and know so much more than the previous generation, that they had one of their ancestors, whether it was their parent, grandparent or great-grandparent, had some sort of transformative experience. Just think about that for a bit. They had that, and the children are indigo children. So if you wanted to track back, say it's true, If you wanted to track back to the appearance of the indigo children, which is 82, 85, around that time, and go back before that to 40 years, we've got people who were in World War II. I'm just saying this now, I'm thinking about it. You know, like there's a whole group of people in the 80s who were born who were bright and smart. There would have been a lot of people from the World War II who had those sorts of experiences. They would have come close to death. When you're in the jungle, we're in the jungle or wherever it is that you are, your sensitivities are heightened. You're under stress, aren't you? Right. So there's the trigger. There's a big trigger, and there's a whole group of people who did that. So it's just a thought on that. But let's just go on to Sheldon Jenkins talks about the Black Death in 1340. 75 to 200 million dead. But after that, there were profound religious, social, and economic upheavals, causing a historic shift, which was sort of like a precursor to our modern world now. 1755, the Lisbon earthquake, 60,000 killed, but sparked the European Enlightenment. 1976, the Tangshan earthquake, 255,000 killed, but end of the Maoist era in China. 2001, we all know that one, terrorist attacks targeted the USA, 3,000 dead collectively, but there was a study being undertaken in the UK at the time, and they found the suicide rates dropped in that group by 40% in England and Wales. So you could, that was just where the study was being done. Imagine if you could have done a study in the Western world or wherever, all over the world, those who could give a damn about the terrorist attack, what would the suicide rates have dropped collectively around the planet? Interesting thoughts, isn't it? So these soul quakes change us, or people have these experiences, and then we go on and change the world. So we become change artists. Okay. Now, Professor Emma Whitelaw, let's talk about her. She's an Australian. And she studies epigenetics. I'm sure some of you have heard about that. Epigenetics seems to be, and I've only just read it through briefly this last week actually, but my understanding is the study of the triggers for our genes. What turns them on, what turns them off, okay? And they're finding that what we once thought was genetic is not. It's not passed on from our ancestors, but it's there are things that our ancestors did that were passed on. For example, she studied, in the beginning she studied mice, and she studied how mice mothers licked their children, right? And there were changes in those children, but they weren't just, those same changes didn't just stay with that child. Do we call it child? Mouse baby, I don't know, what do you call them? It went on to the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation. So it sort of blows the whole nature or nurture thing out of the water. And so the field of epigenetics is really interesting here. And so that it seems, this is the early days, but it seems that it's true in some respects that information transfers across generations. Actually, it's true in all respects. So, that for me is very interesting because it seems that we can mould our children and their children and their children for what's coming. Now we've got these highly intelligent group of children called the indigos. We've got people, the next generations after that, who are called cultural creators. So we've got those children who are going to grow up in a time where our world is in trouble, don't we? In trouble. We need to do something about it. Those children are intelligent, creative, and innovative. And isn't that exactly what we need to get ourselves out of the fix that we've put ourselves in? So I find the whole idea of this generational theme, I guess you'd call it, almost almost, it'd be nice to live for a couple of 100 years and actually see how it all plays itself out, wouldn't it? But imagine if there is a mechanism at play in humans, or all living things, in the universe, where where we can know somehow about the future, which some of these near-death experiences know, they have knowledge of the future. We somehow set up the resources within our own species to solve our problems down the track. Well, isn't that an interesting thought? How does that happen? You know, that's a really big picture there. So, these, and this is another one I came across, blessed unrest experiences, I like that term. So they transform people into change artists who become self-organising, where there's no leaders and no managers. And guess what? I know that from being in the UFO field for a long time, that people talk about extraterrestrial societies who are advanced, who are just like that. No leaders, no managers. They're just self-organising because they become more in touch with their own higher existence. And as we move into the larger picture of who we are, we automatically live in accordance with that principle of self-governance, self-responsibility and self-awareness. And you can see various stages of that in our society, can't you, where people are becoming much more responsible. I mean, you can focus on the negatives and people will do that, and that's fine. But, you know, we're also changing, and you don't get change just popping up out of nowhere. It seems to happen like that, but it's like this lava flow underground, or let's use spring water. It's going underground. There's always change happening, but when it builds to a critical time, it then emerges. And that's when you see the change. You go, oh, that's great. But, you know, it's always been going on, we just didn't recognise it. So, and the collapse anxiety, which a lot of people feel now, always precedes innovative opportunities. And we're going through this prolonged collapse, anxious moment, I think, right now. But people are changing. And there are people who are coming up with brilliant ideas on how to solve problems. It's just a matter of whether the timing will work well. I believe it will. So progressive social movements originate from humans awakening to new consciousness. If you think of all the social movements in our history that have occurred from that, right? That it'd be nice to go back and look at the people in, well, we know the suffragette movement, for example, how women were treated and the intense experiences that they had before, to rile them enough to rise up and then do something about it, and then that change, you know, all those types of transformational groups in society have all been through things like that. So I find that really interesting. I wanted to share the whole idea of her thoughts. We took it a bit further, the whole near-death experience. In society it's peppered with people having all sorts of experiences. Remember, 4 to 15% of society. You don't need everyone to change for change to happen. You only need a small amount because it will flow on and on. It'll flow on in our lives and out from us, and we know it does because our circle of influence, the types of people that we hang around with, talk about these things. We want better things. But just that alone is great. But then if you pass that on without even knowing it to your children, and then they pass that on to their children, those changes are inherent in them as well. I find that really fascinating. So PMH Atwater believes that our highest purpose is to become co-creators with the Creator. And to do that, we need to get in touch with what it is that this higher intelligence, or call it God, if you like, I don't know, whatever you call it, but that sense of divinity, I guess you could call it, that intelligence that we can connect with. And I'll just tell you a little story. Some years ago I was working for a supermarket company, worked there for 7 years. Talk about, you know, soulless work or soulless company. And it was, I knew about year 5, if I don't get out of here, something's going to happen to me physically, because I could actually feel my chest was starting to fill up like concrete. I thought, I'm going to have a heart attack eventually or something, because what I was finding was I have these ideals, but because I couldn't get a job in the field that I wanted, I had to take the work that I could get, right? And how many of us had that experience? So, at various times anyway. So, but it was having a collective effect on me, because the part of me that was the soul part was wanting to come out more, and this other part was really crushing it, so I just had to do something and get out of there. But, so and when I did, it was just much better for me, and I actually became more connected to that higher part of myself and the greater mechanisms in the universe and that intelligence, I think. I had a sense of it being around me all the time. And sort of standing back and seeing how it moves around people and their lives. So the purpose of transformative experience seems to be to help us to remember what we've forgotten. And so that we can, we need to, you know, re-establish that sense of connection with our soul self, I think, and prepare for that true maturity that we all want to go into and grow into, is to rediscover and re-identify with a higher soul or higher spirit, call it what you like. And I think when you do that, I mean, I've seen people who don't do that and they can walk around with a big black heavy cloud, and other people who do, far fewer of them, but there is something emanates from those people. You know, it's like that sense of deeper happiness and balance and completeness, and I see them to be much, much happier. So, I just wanted to leave this with you. I think I might have said this before, but I do think that in the future, you know, we're growing into that more mature state that we can exist in, the richer, deeper person that we are, connected to soul or to spirit when we do that. And I really like this by Octavio Paz, beyond myself somewhere, I await for my arrival. And I believe that's very true, that we're always, every day, growing into the mature version of ourselves as we get closer and closer and closer to that divine destiny. So thank you for that. I just wanted to share that with you, and I hope you enjoyed that part of today.